Welcome, everybody. This is our Fund Our Schools Phones app training. My name is Jennifer Wong, and I'm from the Toronto and York Region Labor Council and also part of the Fund Our Schools campaign.
And my name's Carl Gardner. I'm the organizer with the Elementary Teachers of Toronto. And the Fund Our Schools campaign is a coalition of education unions who are fighting and really coalescing around the issue of the sort of chronic and generational underfunding of our schools. Um, Jennifer, take it away.
There's three quick ways you can take action on the Fund Our Schools campaign, which is fundourschools.ca. The first one is sharing your story. It's super important for union members, for teachers, education workers, for members of the public, like parents and supporters, to go on the website and quickly share their story about what's happening inside our schools. Um, that the reason why we want to share that is because we need to counter the narrative that historic investments are being made into education. But for those people who are a little bit shy, we want to reassure you that the whole process is confidential, that whenever you submit your story, whether by phone or by typing it in, that everything you share will be stripped of all the confidentiality pieces, like knowing who you are, your name, your school, your ward. We publicize the story after it's all stripped of all that identifying stuff.
Great. A second way you can plug into the Fund Our Schools campaign is uh, a really simple action. If you just go to our website, you'll see front and center a Take Action Now button. And when you click that, it'll take you to an email that has been pre-written, that is open for you to customize however you see fit. And you'll be able to send this email demanding more funding for public education. And it'll go simultaneously to the Premier, to the Education Minister, Paul Calandra, to the education critic and the leader of the NDP, as well as trustees and MPPs. And so this is a great way for you to take a really simple action, but for it to have a very wide impact.
We've also developed on the website under the resources tab a bunch of videos, a bunch of literature that you can feel free to use or to clip and share. So there's three short videos about understanding the structures of school boards and how you can delegate at your school board, understanding the underfunding issue, the structural underfunding that all school boards in Ontario are facing, and lots more to be seen there. So please head to that website and go to resources.
Yeah, lots of great resources there. And so before we jump into the phone zap, we just wanted to give everyone watching this video a bit of a crash course in the provincial education funding crisis. At the time that we're recording this, the new numbers from the Ontario government have just been released about education funding for next year. And what we're seeing is that based on the numbers that we have, Ontario has underfunded our public education system by $6.3 billion since 2018. This $6.3 billion gap is compared to if education funding had just rose with enrollment and inflation every year since 2018, we would have over $6 billion more in our education system than we do right now. This is a historic and generational underfunding of our schools, and one that we're going to be feeling and students are going to be feeling for years to come. And so what we're seeing is that school boards are facing structural deficits. Now, this is just a fancy word for saying that they receive less money from the government than they require for the basics of education. Even simple things that the province is required to pay for, like teacher salaries, like CPP and EI contributions, the provincial government gives boards often less money than they even need to cover those costs. So that means every year, school boards are faced to either balance their budgets through cuts or run a deficit. And so we're seeing more and more that the province is using the self-made funding crisis to force school boards to implement their own cuts, right? And so it takes the heat off the Conservative government a little bit because it looks like the boards are making the cuts, but really what's happening is the province is not giving them enough money in the first place. And so what's the result of this? Well, last year, 35 school boards ran deficits. That is almost 50%. And so what we're seeing obviously here is not a board deficit problem, but a provincial funding problem.
Yeah, and just like Carl said, it's not a spending problem. There are school boards that are, not appropriately spending their money, but that's dimes and nickels compared to the structural underfunding that all school boards are facing. And so what's happening is that our education minister, Paul Calandra, is using this funding crisis to discipline and threaten school boards. So in the context of underfunding, and remember, every single school board in Ontario by June 30th has to submit a balanced budget. That's just the law. It means those balanced budgets are cuts to what workers, teachers, students are facing inside our schools. And so just to give an example from the Toronto District School Board, it's receiving 127 million less than it should. I think all school boards don't get their CPP and EI paid, that the federally mandated increases are not paid to them. It's projecting a 58 million deficit in the 2025-2026 year. And just last week, the TDSB has already approved cuts to staffing, increased class sizes, and so many more just to try to dwindle down that deficit. It's also considering closing pools, uh, doing cuts to our music education, outdoor education, adult education, continuing education, and cutting support staff. And the TDSB is expecting $400 less per student next year in 25-26 than in 2018. And so what we need to do is transform all those numbers from statistics to stories, because we know that some people get lost in the numbers, right? We want to make sure that we are actually talking about what those cuts mean in a real life experience. So we encourage you, maybe you want to pause the video, maybe you want to have a brainstorming session together, take out a piece of paper and talk about how have the cuts um, occurred? How have they impacted your child or your student's education experience? And how would further cuts make their experience worse? So for my example, and we list some examples here, you could lose a spec ed teacher, you could have larger class sizes that are harder and harder for teachers and ed workers to manage. There could be fewer classroom supports, losing a music instructor, losing outdoor education, which is super important for kids who don't own a cottage. And lots of kids don't own a cottage. And it requires more parent fundraising from school councils, right? And lots of schools, and maybe I don't know where you are from, but lots of schools in Toronto are crumbling. They're physically crumbling, and basically no money left for basic classroom supplies like paper or toilet paper. And there's less one-on-one support for students who really need it. So for me, as a parent at Duke, like in the recent year, we've lost 6 full-time equivalents at my child's school. We have 850 kids, lost so many resources that were incredibly important to helping make our school a safe place for students. And this is just, if you go to the Fund Our Schools Resources tab, there is a flyer there that will talk about the health impacts of underfunding for people who need more of that brainstorm. From a worker perspective, maybe you don't have kids in the system, maybe you're a worker in a classroom. There's fatigue year over year from larger class sizes, which have more complex student needs. There's a psychological stress, of holding everything together, and that manifests in burnout or illnesses. There's more and more violence increasing in our schools, likely from the pandemic. But that is also because there's understaffing, not enough adults inside our schools, and that's happening. There's an emotional stress for folks. And then there's lots of cancellations of programs for students themselves, like music or gym or special ed, because workers are burning out. They're taking a stress leave, they're taking a mental health leave, and there's not enough people to do supply work in homeroom classrooms, which is why, music, gym, other supports, arts teachers are being pulled to maintain those homeroom classrooms. There's also heat stress for some schools. There's no AC, and that impacts people's ability to work and to learn. And students, children are overwhelmed by these large classrooms, and they get less individual attention. So, and not to mention all the variety of needs that spec ed students might have, and that they're not being met. So our prescription, what we're saying is that um, underfunding of education is leading to a burnout of all teachers and education workers in our schools, and we need to adequately fund our schools. And the underfunding of education is not meeting our students' needs. So we just wanted to leave you there with some examples.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just to really hammer it home. It's just so important for us to be talking about how these cuts are impacting our lives, because $6 billion sounds like a big number, but often, gets lost in the abstract for people. And so really keep this in mind as we proceed to the Phones app, because, your participation in this Phones app is going to be even more powerful if you ground it in your own experience and the experience of students. And so make sure you have those examples ready in mind. And so, for those of you who haven't done a Phones app before, it's pretty simple. You're going to review the script together, which will be in the next couple slides, and make sure you read it over once and think about how you plan to personalize it with your own story. You're going to want to have your phone numbers ready. And so the organizers of this will have sent those to you. We'll also have a document for you guys with some handy phone numbers as well. And make your calls. And when you're calling, make sure you're ready for either someone to answer, and it might not be the minister that you're calling for, it might be their staff. So you can leave a message, or if you go straight to voicemail, feel free to just to launch right into your script, right? And talk about your story, because that will get through to the minister in the following day. So here we have a script specifically for MPPs. And so you introduce yourself. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I am a constituent calling because you insert the name of your school board here, is facing massive cuts due to underfunding from the province. Since 2018, the province has cut $6.3 billion from education, compared to if funding had simply rose with inflation and enrollment. As a result, almost half of school boards across Ontario are grappling with deficits and are being forced to cut vital staff and programs. This clearly isn't a deficit problem, it's a provincial underfunding problem. I'm calling today to ask why your government has overseen these catastrophic cuts to education. Claims about historic investments just don't match the financial realities in our schools. For example, at my school, and this is where you'd insert your own story, and then you'll conclude by saying, I'm asking you to close the $6.3 billion funding gap that this government has created since 2018, pay back the reserve funds that boards were told to spend during the pandemic, and stop threatening to take over school boards for deficits the province is causing in the first place. There is nothing left to cut. Kids are already paying the price, and half-truths about funding and threats of board takeover are not the answer we need. Proper education funding is. Thank you. So a really simple script here. Feel free to use it as much or as little as you need. What's important is that you are speaking from your own perspective and speaking about the importance of funding schools. So this is a phone script for MPPs. You might want to pause the video now if you're going to make these calls, and keep the script up on the screen for everybody. And when you're ready to switch to the trustee scripts, that's going to be coming next. So you'll see here that the script for trustees is a little bit different because the ask is going to be different, right? Trustees are in an interesting category here, an interesting position kind of in between the students and the teachers on one side and the provincial funding on the other, right? As we were mentioning before, they're often in the position of implementing the government's cuts, unfortunately. So if you're going to call your trustee, here's a sample script for you. Hello, my name is so-and-so, and I'm describe who you are, if you're a teacher, your parent, a caregiver, a resident, or multiple of those, and say that you're in their ward. I'm calling to express my strong opposition to any cuts to our schools this year. You must know that there's nothing left to cut. We've experienced massive provincial underfunding for years. Teachers keep being asked to do more with less supports. Class sizes are way too big. Our schools are crumbling. Special education supports are inadequate, and students are feeling the cuts. Kids will be the ones who pay the price for any further cuts. You and your fellow trustees must not support any more cuts to education. We elected you to stand up and fight for students, for teachers, for education workers, and for the education system as a whole, not to implement conservative government cuts every year. I'm asking you to vote no to any budgets that include cuts that will hurt students in our schools, or you'll lose the trust of parents, caregivers, teachers, education workers, and students across the board. Thank you. So you'll see here that the ask is a little bit different. We are telling trustees to stand up and advocate for the interests of teachers, for education workers, for students, and to not implement any further conservative government cuts. If they want to cut administrative budgets and these bloating administrative salaries, that might not necessarily hurt students in our schools. And so really what you're trying to focus your ask on is voting no to any budgets that include cuts that will impact students in our schools, in our classrooms right now. So that's all we have for the Phones app training, and you've seen both scripts there. Feel free to rewind the video and pause on those different scripts if you need to use them. We'll also have sent out a Google Doc with the scripts and phone numbers included in them too, if you wanna use those as well. And I just want to say thank you for attending this training. Jennifer, do you have any final words?
Thanks to Carl for doing this with me. And for folks who actually do hold the phones up wherever you are, please feel free to let us know that you've done that. That would be really encouraging news to us.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.